Are you a workaholic? Well, then today's episode might be perfect for you. Desiree Therianos is a PeopleOps leader and mother of two. She's also a self-described workaholic. So this is a really great conversation. We talk about things like burnout and fully unplugging on maternity leave and redefining who you are after you become a mom. I found it really informative. I appreciate you listening. If you would click the follow button and leave me a rating, that would mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents, if you can believe that. My guest today, she is a people leader at Databricks. She's also a mother of five. Ladies and gentlemen, Desiree Therianos. Desiree, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So why don't we just kick off really quick background on your career thus far?
Where do I start? I've been in startup HR for about 20 years. I started my career in HR at a company called Hot or Not. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but
I think I remember that from back in the day. Yeah.
had a lot of fun there. Didn't really dive into HR. I was doing more customer support and operations, and then kind of fell into HR. And from there, I never went back.
Awesome.
At that time, so that was right before I had my daughter, who's now 19.
Okay.
And so, I was, let me go back and talk a little bit about how I found Hot or Not. I actually had taken a year off when I found out I was having a baby, and I was doing a different career. I was actually in liquor distribution. I worked for a company called Shefflin Somerset. I helped launch Ciroc vodka. This is before anybody knew that was a thing. And when I found out I was expecting, it was a little bit of an occupational hazard. So I was like, okay, I've got to rethink this equation. What do I want to do? Because I couldn't see myself being successful and having a little one and doing that career path.
Sure.
And at that time I was 25. So, young kiddo, trying to figure life out, trying to figure out what do I want to be when I grow up. And, very blessed for that experience, but taking a year off for me was like it was not something I embraced. So staying home was really difficult. And I was like, okay, what am I going to get back into now? And I answered a Craigslist post, and I ended up going into the Hot or Not offices to interview. And they said, wow, you're a Berkeley graduate. You're really overqualified for this position. And that at that time, it was just, answering customer emails. And I said, you know what? I just need to get out of the house. Because I need to talk to adults and have a little bit of a shift. So that's kind of where my career started, and my journey into parenthood.
Gotcha. And so you're mother of five, is that right?
I am a mother of five. I'm a stepmom to three. I have a daughter who's 19 and a daughter who's 10 years old. And my spouse has three other children from another marriage. And so we're a big blended family. Of five.
Love it. Yeah. Sure. How do you feel like your experience in HR has informed the way that you've been a parent, if at all?
Yeah. I would say running a people function for scaling startups, for one, you have to operate in chaotic situations and you have to be creative and empathetic. And so, learning those things, being able to take a time out when I need it. I'm very transparent with myself because it's hard to do it all perfectly, especially when you're running really fast. And I think that happens in the home life with five kids. And I think that happens in a different way in the work environment as well, especially as part of startup growth.
Yeah. How about the other way? Do you think you've started to approach your career in HR differently after becoming a mom?
I was a mom before I got in HR, and I learned some valuable things too, that sometimes, things aren't going to happen the way we want. How can you stay agile? And I very much have practiced that. Again, kind of taking that break and time out when you need it to pivot. And I think it's hard for working parents to do that sometimes. I think we aspirationally want to do it all, and it's just not feasible to do it all perfectly. Right. So I kind of think of it more as work-life integration. How am I going to get all these things to work together? And it's going to ebb and flow at times. And so again, kind of staying kind to myself and knowing when I need to take that time out, even when it's disciplining the children or whether it be in the day-to-day work.
Yeah.
You have to kind of have that patience and kindness with yourself first.
What else is really important to find that work life integration? I think that's an interesting concept. People are trying to say that more often than work life balance, and so I'm curious to hear what your other thoughts are on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I was saying that 20 years ago too. And so it's very deeply ingrained for me. But I think present day, especially with some of the things that have materialized in the last 3 years, we don't have a choice, right? We've had to mesh all these things together and create these boundaries. And it's really difficult to do. But I think now we're a little bit more empathetic, to the person on the receiving end to say, hey, they're probably going through this same thing as well, right?
Yeah.
I remember I was running, an executive meeting at Okera, and my little one, because we had work from home during the pandemic and remote school. And she hops on the Zoom and says, "Mommy, your breath smells." I just had, and here I am like presenting to 10 executives.
Oh my
Um,
God.
I, I had been drinking coffee, and, so that's what she didn't like, the smell of coffee. But what do? You
Yeah,
have to roll with it.
that's right. Yeah, and I'm sure in the moment that's a little embarrassing, but I do find that it's usually helps like endear you to the people that you're speaking to, and they see a little bit more of like your family life, and you're on the phone, and the kids jump in and stuff like that. I think most people appreciate that for the most part.
Yeah, I think we've connected in a different way, right? Because although it's been difficult to, not be in the office setting and see everybody, physically, I think we've gained more empathy and a different level of connection when you're able to see kind of behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you also have in your job history executive director slash mother of Raising Rebel Girls, which is actually how I
Yes.
how I had found you. I used to work with
Oh,
your
you
sister
did a sir.
Leah, but
Oh,
I didn't.
yeah.
That's not how I found you on LinkedIn. I actually
Oh,
found you
interesting.
from that. I thought that was really interesting. What does that mean to you, Raising Rebel
Um,
Girls?
that's a great question. And you know what? I actually, like, I don't have that trademark. Someone else does. And I picked up that book. There's like a series of books of rebel women who have influenced history. And I bought these books for my little one. And, it resonated. And I'm like, oh, wow, you know what? That I'm aspiring to be a mom to rebel girls. And what that means to me is um, sometimes you have to bend the rules, to get ahead and to make an impact. And we are in this society and this system, and if you just take no for the answer, every time you hear it, you might not make progress. So I raise my little ones to ask the tough questions, and they apply this to me more so than anyone else right now. But I think it's more about you know being strong-willed, not being afraid to back down when you have conviction. And so that's, I'm hoping that as young ladies that they're going to, have that unapologetic, fearless drive.
Yeah, a lot of times I think we want to instill things in our kids that we wish we had growing up, or we wish our parents had instilled in us more. And I'm curious, is this something that you had in your life growing up, or something that you found as an adult and you're like, I wish I had this growing up, and I want to make sure my kids have it too?
Yeah, it's a great question too. I think I had it in me from a really early age, and I've kind of pushed the boundaries, and that's I think what's made me really successful in the HR space as a leader. I just didn't know what to call it. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't name it. And when I started to, it actually gave my voice more power. And so, being able to portray it even in my day to day, like my daughters will hear me in meetings, and like, those are learned behaviors, the things subconsciously that they're going to see and be exposed to. And so, um, you just have to stand true, right, to your
Yeah,
voice. I
sure.
think that's the biggest thing we can impart on our little ones.
Yeah, love it. You mentioned having a hard time in the year that you had taken off when you first became a mom. So I assume that you're just like a maybe just like you like working, right? I guess you're just like kind of like a career person, and it just was it hard for you to just not have that part of your life. And I'm just curious what that experience was like, and what led you to be like, I have to go back to working.
Yeah, it's a different muscle I had to, leverage that was very foreign to me. Staying home, doing laundry, cooking, like that to me wasn't satisfying, and not having these challenging environments where I'm solving. So I think it more so comes from impact, right? And I don't want to negate the fact that I was home making big impact with my little one's development, but I wanted a different type of challenge, right? And the one where you're literally exhausted, running on fumes, because her dad would come home at like 5 o'clock. So really, I was kind of manning the child rearing, and he would come in the door, and I would be like, "Here's the baby. See you later." uh, and so that was a different level of exhaustion and a different level of kind of mind space that was being leveraged. So I kind of craved that interaction. I'm a really social person, and I really like to solve things and help people. And so it was more a yearning of, hey, I need to do more right now. I want to be an amazing mother, but if I can't fulfill some of those, instinctual needs for myself, I won't, my cup will be half full for what
Sure.
I can give to my little one.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My wife is kind of in the middle of that right now. Our daughter's about 8 weeks old, so she's about 8 weeks into the
Oh,
leave.
congrats. Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, thanks. And she always was a really ambitious career person. She was a principal, still is a principal of a high school. So
Oh my
I think
goodness.
I think she's still trying to
She's a
figure out.
brave woman. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Um, if you're listening, honey, you're very brave. Yeah. So
what
she's still
what
trying to
year does she, like, is it high school,
high school. Yeah.
elementary?
High
Oh
school.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Double clap.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, she has the craziest stories. But yes, I think she's still trying to, navigate that same idea of how much was my career defining what I did? Like, what do I do in my life without working? And I
Yeah.
think it's a really interesting experience that a lot of people experience, but I think women as well deal with it, maybe in a different way that men do.
Yeah, that you said something that really stood out to me was the redefining. And that really is what it is. Like, you're redefine. Not only was I going through like a career shift, but I was also becoming a parent. So I was looking in the mirror and not recognizing who I was and what I stood for. And I think that process, and I would just say again, like taking that time, I didn't take the time to really appreciate it in the moment. But I want to share another scenario with when I had my second daughter, who is now
Yeah.
10 years old. I was working at another startup called Crunchyroll, anime video streaming.
Yeah.
They scaled very quickly, and we were, going through a big acquisition. AT&T ended up acquiring the company before I left. But I had Ava, and 2 days later, I was doing HR recruiting and operations at Crunchyroll. And 2 days later, I was in the hospital and I was sending wire payments out. So
Wow.
no one told me to do that. I mean, I
Sure.
think they wanted me to. They didn't, but it was never explicitly stated. And I kind of drove myself to some really unhealthy habits, because I didn't want to fall behind. I didn't
Yeah.
want to kind of lose my position and influence in that company, at a time where it was really pivotal. And in startup, like overnight things change, and you have to just always be prepared to run really fast. And I didn't know how to reconcile it. But looking back now, I just think, what the hell were you thinking, right?
Right. So you wouldn't advise someone to do that today.
Unless it's your own company, yeah, I wouldn't advise it. It was not setting up healthy boundaries,
Yeah.
and it just led to a lot of strife later, and really burnout.
Yeah.
I kind of gave too much of myself, and then it was just really tough to recuperate after that.
Yeah. I try to remember in times of like stress related to work. It's just like, is that going to matter like 5 years from now? Right. Like, does it really matter that you did that for Crunchyroll that
Yeah, that's
those,
exactly what
those years
Michael,
ago?
my spouse, said. He's like, look, tomorrow and a year from now, like, you're not even going to remember what you were doing that
Yeah.
took you away from something, really so momentous in your life, because I don't get those moments back. Right. So,
So do you think now, if you could do it again, or if you were to go on leave again, like, do you think that mothers especially should really try to like fully unplug from work for the time that they're on maternity leave? And consider
I'm a,
what the career looks like when they get back?
Yeah, I'm a little torn with this one too, to be honest with you. I'm trying to define it for myself, even present day, because I think when you're in a leadership role, unless you've built a strong, organization around you, it is hard. And I think companies, and look, I'm in the position of an operator to define these programs. And I think we need to create them in a way that really empowers women to say, hey, I'm going to take this time out. And I think it's happening, actually. I think this evolution is happening. We're talking more about it. There's more investments from companies to support people take, even for, fathers to take the time out, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's really critical. But when I think about it personally, I am a workaholic, and I would probably have a hard time.
Yeah. It's
I
hard.
think I
It's
was
hard.
born with a laptop attached. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can relate because I just had a kid, and so
Yeah.
we do have really nice paternity leave, but I'm deferring it a little while just because this is kind of like a busy time for me at work, and I just want to get some stuff done before I can unplug and not worry about it as much. So it's hard
That's
to fully
critical. Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to fully separate from something that does take up a large part of our day, right?
And that you've invested in, right? Like your work product and the things you're putting into it, like it's fulfilling, and that's why we do it, right? And
Yeah.
maybe that's why we do it and over index a bit at times. But
Yeah.
that's why the work life integration to me like really resonates, because at the end of the day, you have to figure out how to make it work for yourself, where you're satisfying your personal needs, the company's needs, and obviously the needs of these little beings we've brought into the world, right? So
Yeah.
there's some non-negotiables. And I learned later on down the line that I had to be bullish with the non-negotiables and flexible with the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to look different for everyone. Like, I don't think of myself as a successful parent. I think of myself as a parent in training.
Uh-huh.
I think of myself as a successful HR leader. But
Okay.
you know what I'm saying? It's how you view your impact to both,
Yeah.
right? And then how you kind of set up those boundaries. And the non-negotiables for me are, I do drop off every morning. I'm the one to do the hair, to serve the breakfast, to get the little one ready. And during that time, I'm out of pocket. You're not gonna find me when it comes to work related things, right? But
Yeah.
bath time, we might not get a bath in every day. That will, so you have to reconcile it in a way for you that it doesn't negatively impart on all the efforts you're putting, whether it
Yeah.
be, efforts you're giving in the home or efforts at work, right?
Yeah, I'm already like maybe not bath time every day. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe we got to skip a few here.
Yeah. So I think that, again, like defining what those boundaries are
Yeah.
really important, and then communicating them well, because that was the other lesson that I've learned in kind of corporate America, especially in startup realm. If you put the boundaries and communicate them well, people will have respect for that,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, communicating boundaries when it comes to being a working parent, I feel like is the number one thing that people talk about. I feel like it's so important because it is okay to still want to work hard and care a lot about your work, but there it is work, right? It is not life or death unless you're like a surgeon or a guest or something like that. And so I think it is important to be able to set that boundary and say, hey, look, at this time I'm busy and you guys have to figure it out without me.
Yeah. I think we're still afraid of it. I think we're,
Yeah.
um,
Well, people, I mean,
yeah,
there's people above you that you worry will judge that decision, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I think we need to normalize
We
people
need to
not being afraid
normalize it. Absolutely.
for sure.
Absolutely.
So you have 5 kids, right? Are they all in the house still, or some of them are gone?
Michael's eldest son, who's 22, moved out on his own. And
Wow.
then
Okay.
the other 4 are with us. We
Okay.
also have 2 chihuahuas. We
Okay.
have a little farm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the theme for me is being able to operate under chaos. And then we have 8 cats.
Okay. 8.
um, Michael, we had 2 out. They're outdoor, but Michael brought him a COVID kitty that actually ended up having babies. So we didn't know.
Oh wow.
So I
Okay.
can add kitty doula to my resume too.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say, when you have 6 cats, and you get 2
Yeah.
more, like I guess, but I guess they all came out. There was kind of a package deal, huh?
Yeah. And then we didn't want to separate the little family. So,
Sure. Okay.
we juggle a lot, but I think, yeah, relying on, well, for one, the older kids are super helpful. And
Yeah.
as you know, as Ava, the youngest one, gets older, it is easier. But this is a different generation. Like the reliance on technology, the reliance on the iPad, like
Hmm.
the game, all those things. There isn't a playbook for how to maneuver that as a parent.
Yeah. How
So we
about
we struggle with that daily.
how about time for yourself with all these kids and cats and chihuahuas? Like how do you make time for yourself? Do you have any tips for self-care?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I like frameworks a lot. I
Okay.
apply frameworks at work. So, what I've thought to kind of put in place for myself and really lean into in this last year primarily was, you know, the once a day, the once a week, the once a month, the once a year. And so there are things that, kind of getting regimented around blocking that time for self care, I think is really important. Like daily, I try to do a walk 30 minutes, right? It could be simple, don't have to really go anywhere, right? Once a week, it's hard, right? But for me, I like exploring, so I'll try a new restaurant or I'll go to a new coffee shop. Like that's self-care to me, and I think it's important to define what that looks like for yourself, right? But
Yeah.
again, then being able to say, hey, I'm going to block this off once a day, this off once a week, and then like once a month I started getting massages, and then once a year I'll do like a little vacation with some girlfriends, like just something that kind of fills my cup, right?
Sure. That makes sense.
And sometimes it's difficult, but I think if for me, if I've taken it like in small nuggets, it's become more habitual, and so that's how I recharge.
Are there sacrifices that you've had to make in your career for your family or for, vice versa? Sacrifices you made for your family or
Yeah,
because of your family?
I think it's been more the opposite. The family has taken the brunt sometimes. Like I've been involved in a couple startups that went through, some really big acquisitions, and merger and acquisition is like another beast, especially if you're part of a deal team. And so, even when AT&T was acquiring Crunchyroll, I would have to fly to LA on, a drop of a dime, and
Yeah.
just be accessible. The other way around, I've had to learn. And this last year has been more of a learning for me. So it's taken a little bit of time, but my daughter wants me to be there on the field trip. So last year I chaperoned every field trip, and
Wow.
there were some deadlines, and I was mindful to tee things up where I didn't leave anybody in a bad position, but I was like, look, I got to do this. I'm taking the day off, and I'm going to go explore with my kiddo to Oakland Zoo, or wherever we went. Right. But
And the world
again,
kept spinning, right?
and the world kept spinning, and,
Yeah.
someone might have not been happy in the moment, but in the long run, it wasn't detrimental. Right. So I
Right.
think just using the best judgment again to kind of mesh those things together.
Yeah. Something
Yeah.
that's been on my mind lately. Do you think about the effect that we have on our kids, like psyche, like they're especially in those first 0 to 5 years? They're so impressionable at that time, and it feels like it's really entirely up to the parents how they
Yeah.
fare.
Yeah, there's so I mean, they're like little sponges at that time. It's such a formative time, right?
Mhm.
And even our stress level, right? And I actually think that, because Ava's the youngest, but she's my most high strung. She's the little one that I had when I was working in like probably the most stressful period of my career.
Yeah.
Um, and I do see it. I see that sometimes she's like super anxious, and it could just be a slew of other things, right? But having that self awareness while you're learning to be a parent, and while you're learning to provide all the needs, there's also this subconscious emotional piece that I think we underestimate, right? And
Yeah, for sure.
that that having your cup half empty really resonates with me, because if you're not whole and you can't bring 100% to the table when you're interacting even with your little one, or if you're too tired, right, that's when things can go awry sometimes, right?
Yeah. Are there any other important tips or secrets to success in juggling work life and family life and being a busy working parent that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the big one for me is be kind with yourself and take the time to really define what success means. Because for a long time, I was operating under someone else's definition and model. And I was running really fast and working really hard. And, my family suffered because I wasn't present. So be kind, um, be present, right? Um, and there's another little anecdote that I try to apply to my work environment, but also in home lately is, every day you're having transactional interactions, and it's like really simple stuff like even, the hello, how are you doing, when you really don't care to hear how someone is doing. But how can we
Mhm.
make those more transformational? Right. And when I
Yeah.
started to think about that with my little ones, even on the school drop off, like I said, I do that every morning. I ask Ava every day, how are you going to change the world today? Right. I'm just really trying to think of thoughtful things to get her to think more critically on her impact. But it also is almost like a mirror, right? Because as I'm applying this when talking to her, it, bounces back and I'm like, hey, wait a second. What are
Yeah.
you doing
Right.
in the same regard? So be kind. It is possible to have it all, but something is going to have to sacrifice in the moment. And, you have to be the one to define it for yourself rather than letting your surroundings and your work environment do that for you.
Why do you think self kindness and self compassion is so hard for most of us?
There's this guilt behind it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I know
It's
I
hard to
feel it
define.
sometimes for sure. Yeah. It's almost like we're being selfish, not selfless, right? And
Right.
that's not really condoned, right?
Yeah. I've heard people say like, take care of yourself and like treat yourself like you would be treating somebody else, right? Like I think it's easier
Yep,
to like take care of yourself as though you're trying to take care of a friend because it's easier to take care of somebody else than yourself sometimes for whatever reason.
definitely resonates. Yeah.
Yeah. All
I
right, we're gonna
can't
move.
say I haven't nailed that one yet.
That's okay. It's a moving target sometimes, right?
It's a moving
I think
target.
that also like when you're practicing self care, you have an idea of what it is, and I think over time your own needs change, right? And then just there's new
Yep.
ways that you need to practice it. All right, we're going to move into the final segment called Desiree's Advice Corner. I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few areas, and we're going to
Awesome.
get some thoughts from you. All right?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. So the first question is, what advice would you give for a woman who's approaching her first maternity leave?
Yeah, I looking back now, I did this exercise a little too late, but I sat down and literally defined a set of values for myself. And I help startups do this. And I was like, hey, we're going to apply this to you personally. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I say that is because those are things that are going to dictate your actions and behaviors and how you communicate and show up to the world as a mother and to your world as a working parent. And so, one of my values is connect with my girls. And that could look different every single day. But, when I'm being true to the things that for me are necessary, then it's easier for me to communicate and set the boundaries. So kind of come up with what you stand for so you don't fall for anything, right? And I think it's hard as a new mom or even going on to the maternity leave to feel, to think that way because you're thrust into what do I have to do to take leave, all the formal filings, all the things at work you have, like there's so many things. But if you kind of stand for those values, you'll approach those conversations and all the mandatory things in a different way, right? And it's coming from a place of, hey, these needs have to be met for me to even come back and re-enter the workforce successfully, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for some, I had a really close friend and she actually decided like, hey, I'm not going back to that position. It's not serving me. It won't serve my values. So this is a good transition overall to kind of hand it over smoothly and really take that time to bond with my baby before I
Right.
come back. So that might be, that might be the discovery in that time.
What advice do you have for somebody who's starting out a career in HR and wants to have a successful career like you?
Yeah, that's don't be afraid of the unknowns. Don't be afraid of the unknowns. I think people do people things all the time. And in HR, there are a lot of compliance and regulations and processes. And if you let that limit you in terms of the impact you want to make, um, then it'll do just that, right? So come at
Yeah.
it from a place of wanting to empower people and learn as much as you can. And there's so many resources, there's so many ways to like really dive into this, but I think your motivations have to be genuine, because it's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
having to lay someone off who just had a baby or whatever the circumstances, right?
Sure.
Like there are a lot of hard things that you're going to face in that profession. And so you have to do it in a humble way and in a servant leadership approach, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know how you do that. That's a tough one. Um, I don't know if I feel like that's why I've had an individual contributor role. And I think that's part of the reason why I think giving that hard feedback and making hard decisions like that is tough.
It's really hard sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you do it in a humane and compassionate way, and again, like really that applies where you treat someone like you want to be treated,
Hmm.
that's really helped me
Sure.
through some hard stuff myself.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Where there's a will, there's a way. I heard that several times, and it really kind of fueled my problem solving nature. Um, and sometimes it's selfish because I want to move forward. Sometimes it's to help someone else. But I think there's always a way.
Mhm.
Might not be the number one thing you wanted it to be, but it'll evolve to something that still will help you grow.
What advice would you give to your former self?
Set those boundaries and kind of really be true to your own voice, because there were times when I just didn't do it and kicked myself for it later.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right, final question. What advice
Yeah.
do you have for me as the father of a 2-month-old daughter?
um I say one is an accessory, two is when shit gets real. so
Okay.
so if you think about that, um, in that way, laugh at the tough stuff, laugh at the funny stuff, like really take time to appreciate this moment, because you're only going to get it once with your daughter. You might have another, but um, keep it light. Keep it light, and appreciate as much of what you're giving to her as the learning she's going to impart on you through this change.
So one is an accessory, meaning like she's just like a little accessory of me for the first year because she's not doing much.
I mean,
Okay.
it's just like easy.
Sure.
and
No,
and
yeah.
adding another one, it's like literally it like triples.
I
It
gotta
triples
say, I've
the
been thinking a lot. I've been thinking a lot of. I say this to my wife almost every day. I was like, "Can you imagine if we had like a 2-year-old right now and this baby? Like,
and
it's
another,
probably
yeah, I
right,
can't
or
even
or, right, or
imagine.
a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Like, I don't know
Yeah,
anyone
I
out
don't know
there who
how
has more than
parents
one
do it.
kid. That's
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah,
So
but I
I
guess
mean,
we'll find
my
out one day.
sister Leah, but my parents had 5 kids at once, and we were each like a year apart. And
Yeah,
that gives me empathy to just think about that time. And I'm like, how the heck did they do it? Because my daughter's 19 now and Ava's 10. I mean,
yeah,
that's a pretty
yeah.
good spread. So
Right.
it was manageable for me. But for a lot
Yeah,
of people, they have to juggle a lot. And little ones, when they start to self-identify and have their own voice, and it's not easy to get them to cooperate to your schedule, right?
yeah. Totally.
We're on their schedule a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, I appreciate the advice.
Um,
All right, Desiree. Well, this has been a great chat. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you, or is there anything you want to share or promote?
yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Right now, I'm working with Databricks, and trying to figure out what my next move will be. So please find me on LinkedIn, Desiree Therianos. I'm excited to connect with folks and learn more myself through those connections.
Sure. I'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Desiree Therianos, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you,
Anthony,
Desiree.
thank you.
All right. Bye.
Cheers.